Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A Gaza ceasefire before the start of Ramadan appears increasingly unlikely after Hamas delegates left Cairo talks without an agreement after accusing Israel of thwarting efforts put forward by mediators. Hamas says negotiations will nonetheless continue. Israel reportedly boycotted the recent talks. The official death toll in Gaza has topped 30,800 in the 5 months since Israel's assault began. At least another 72,000 Palestinians have been wounded. The group Refugees International's warning Israel's persistent blocking of humanitarian aid into Gaza has created apocalyptic conditions inside the besieged territory. At least 20 Gazans have starved to death, the youngest victim a day old. As a number of countries have started conducting airdrops into Gaza, the World Food Program cautioned airdrops are a last resort and will not avert famine, they said. This is a soup kitchen volunteer in Rafah.
Our hearts are being squeezed when a child comes over and says, I want to have rice and chicken. We are unable to provide rice, let alone chicken, in the light of the war that we are experiencing. This is not only a war on civilians, it is a war on food, on starvation. People here in the Gaza Strip cannot find bread to eat.
South Africa has requested the International Court of Justice take additional emergency measures in Gaza, including ordering a ceasefire. South Africa brought the genocide case against Israel at the ICJ. It said, quote, the threat of all-out famine has now materialized. The court needs to act now to stop the imminent tragedy, unquote. Canada says it will resume funding to UNRWA after it halted support for the UN agency in January following Israeli claims 12 UNRWA staff were involved in the October 7th attacks. 16 countries suspended their funding for the agency, bringing it close to collapse amidst the spiraling humanitarian disaster in Gaza. Meanwhile, a new investigation by the Washington Post reveals the Biden administration has quietly approved over 100 weapons sales to Israel, while publicly calling for restraint and decrying the mounting civilian death toll. We'll have more on that story later in the broadcast. U.S. military officials said Wednesday a Houthi missile attack on a commercial ship in the Gulf of Aden killed at least 3 people. It's the first known deaths as a result of the Houthi campaign against Israel and U.S.-linked vessels. The ship that was attacked appears to have been Barbados-flagged, Greece-operated, and Liberia-owned. U.S. and U.K. forces have launched multiple attacks inside Yemen since the Houthi strikes started in protest of Israel's war on Gaza. Here in New York, a delegation of Palestinian Americans who've lost relatives to Israeli attacks in Gaza joined UN Palestinian envoy Riyad Mansour at a UN Security Council press conference Wednesday. This is Dr. Rula El-Farah, who lost over 150 family members since October 7th.
In December, one of our family members, Sabri El-Farah, was murdered in his home by an Israeli airstrike with his 9 young children. His unfortunate wife survived. She was 8 months pregnant. She was displaced to an evacuation camp where she gave birth to her baby boy 1 month later in January. Her child, her newborn infant, died 20 days later from the cold and the harsh conditions in the camps. Every minute signifies the loss of a life, the starvation of a child, and so we need an immediate and permanent, not temporary, permanent ceasefire now.
In Washington, D.C., activists have set up a protest in front of the Israeli embassy. Israeli-American activist Miko Peled says the protest has disrupted embassy business and is calling on more people to join the action until the embassy is forced to shut down.
Palestinian flags have clearly taken over the other flag that's being flown here. The flag of hope is clearly taken over the flag of hate and apartheid. This is the apartheid embassy. And look at all this. Just brilliant, as far as the eye can see.
Miko Peled is the son of a famous Israeli general. In Austin, Texas, at least 5 musical acts have pulled out of the upcoming South by Southwest Festival over its ties to the U.S. military and military contractors, including RTX Corporation, formerly known as Raytheon. RTX supplies weapons to Israel. Outside the United States, Brazil's Central Workers Union, which represents over 7.4 million workers, has called on the Brazilian government to cancel all military cooperation with Israel. In Canada, rights groups are suing the Global Affairs Ministry for exporting military goods and technology to Israel during its assault on Gaza. In Ukraine, a Russian attack on the port city of Odessa killed at least 5 people, according to the Ukrainian Navy. The strike came as President Volodymyr Zelensky was taking the Greek Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, on a tour of the war-ravaged city, where 12 people, including children, were killed in a drone attack last week. The Greek Prime Minister spoke after Wednesday's attack, which the 2 leaders heard as they were getting into their cars following the tour.
And I think this is one more reason why all European leaders should come to Ukraine, because it is one thing to hear the description from the mass media or from President Zelensky, with whom we regularly communicate, and it is completely different to experience the war firsthand.
In Russia, Yulia Navalnaya, the widow of the late opposition leader Alexei Navalny, is urging voters to protest President Vladimir Putin at the polls in the March 17th election.
We need to use the election day to show that we exist and there are many of us. We are real, we are alive, we exist and we are against Putin. We need to come to the polling station in the same day and time, noon of March 17. It is up to you to choose what to do next. You can vote for any candidate but Putin. You can spoil the ballot. You can write on it in big letters, Navalny.
The Miami Herald is reporting the Biden administration's pressuring Haiti's unelected Prime Minister Ariel Henry to resign amidst an armed uprising against his rule. According to a U.S. document obtained by the Miami Herald, the Biden administration's proposed Henry's, quote, step down in the near future. The State Department pushed back on the report, but the UN ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield confirmed the U.S. has asked Henry to form a transitional council that would involve the appointment of a new prime minister. Over the past 3 years, the U.S. has been a key backer of Henry, who's deeply unpopular in Haiti. Last week, Ariel Henry visited Kenya to discuss a plan to send 1,000 international Kenyan police officers to Haiti. Henry is now in Puerto Rico, unable to safely return home. Nikki Haley suspended her presidential campaign Wednesday after losing all but Vermont to Donald Trump on Super Tuesday. Haley declined to endorse Trump or any other candidate as she announced the end of her campaign.
In all likelihood, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee when our party convention meets in July. I congratulate him and wish him well. It is now up to Donald Trump to earn the votes of those in our party and beyond it who did not support him. And I hope he does that.
President Biden made a pitch to Haley's supporters saying, quote, I know there's a lot we won't agree on, but on the fundamental issues of preserving American democracy, on standing up for the rule of law, on treating each other with decency, dignity, and respect, on preserving NATO and standing up to America's adversaries, I hope and believe we can find common ground, Biden said. On Capitol Hill, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who's leaving his leadership post in November, endorsed Donald Trump. In 2021, McConnell said Trump was morally and practically responsible for the January 6th insurrection and called Trump's actions a, quote, disgraceful dereliction of duty. In more related news, the Supreme Court has set April 25th as the date to hear arguments over whether Trump's immune from criminal prosecution for trying to overturn his 2020 election loss. President Biden will deliver his State of the Union address tonight before a joint session of Congress. Biden's expected to call for increasing taxes on billionaires and corporations. First Lady Dr. Jill Biden's guests include United Auto Workers President Sean Fain and the Prime Minister of Sweden. Numerous lawmakers are inviting relatives of hostages held in Gaza. Congressmember Cori Bush is bringing Dr. Intima Salama, a Palestinian dentist and graduate student from St. Louis University, who's lost 35 relatives in Israel's assault on Gaza. Republican Congressmember Thomas Massie has invited the brother of Julian Assange, the imprisoned WikiLeaks editor, who's facing U.S. extradition and, if found guilty in a U.S. court, 175 years in jail he could have to serve. Senator Tim Kaine is bringing Elizabeth Carr, the first woman born by IVF in the United States. And Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson has invited the parents of Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter imprisoned in Russia. Alabama Republican Governor Kay Ivey signed into law a bill protecting in vitro fertilization clinics and doctors from lawsuits and prosecution. Lawmakers scrambled to pass the legislation after Alabama's Supreme Court ruled last month frozen embryos have the same rights as children, sending shockwaves through the medical community. At least 3 clinics suspended treatments in Alabama in response to the ruling. 2 of those said they will now resume treatment. Reproductive rights advocates caution the new law does not fully resolve the issue, as it does not address whether a frozen embryo can be considered a child. To see our segments on IVF, go to democracynow.org. France became the first country in the world to enshrine the right to abortion in its constitution. Following the 780 to 72 vote, the Eiffel Tower was lit up with the phrase, "My body, my choice." Abortion has been legal in France since 1975, but lawmakers decided to take the additional step in direct response to the U.S. Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade in 2022. This is leftist lawmaker Mathilde Panot.
We are celebrating a historic victory. Our vote is a promise made to the future. Never will our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren have to relive the torment that has preceded them. Our vote is also a promise to all women around the world who are fighting for the right to have control over their bodies. In Argentina, in the United States, in Andorra, in Italy, in Hungary, in Poland. Like an echo, today's vote tells them that their fight is ours and that this victory is theirs.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul has announced a plan to deploy 1,000 members of the National Guard and state police to patrol New York City subway stations and to check bags of passengers. New York Civil Liberties Union head Donna Lieberman condemned the plan, saying, quote, "These heavy-handed approaches will, like stop and frisk, be used to accost and profile Black and brown New Yorkers, ripping a page straight out of the Giuliani playbook. Today's announcement fails to address long-standing problems of homelessness, poverty, or access to mental health care," Lieberman said. And in New Mexico, a jury found Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the weapons handler on the film Rust, guilty of involuntary manslaughter for the 2022 killing of cinematographer Helena Hutchins by a loaded prop gun. Jurors agreed that Gutierrez-Reed, whose father is a prominent armorer in Hollywood, displayed, quote, "willful disregard for the safety of others," unquote. She faces up to 18 months in prison. Alec Baldwin, who fired the gun during a rehearsal, is the star and producer of Rust. He'll face his own manslaughter trial in July. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.